Jack cautiously stepped out of the narrow alley, the sound of his shoes echoing on the empty street like a warning. His eyes scanned the shadows, looking for any signs of movement. He was a man accustomed to solitude, working in dark corners where few people dared to tread. But tonight, he couldn't escape the fact that he was being hunted. The bikers were closing in, coming after him because of the reputation that had saved him in countless fights. They thought they knew him, but they had no idea what they were about to face. His hand rested on the knife's hilt, the cold metal sending a wave of chill up his arm, but there was no comfort in the silence that surrounded him. The knife was familiar, a tool of survival, but tonight it felt like just an extension of his will. His fingers tightened around it as he steadied his steps. The knife had witnessed many bloody scenes, but Jack had learned long ago that in battles, it was the mind that won, not weapons. From a distance, he heard the roar of the bike engines, a deep sound that grew louder with each passing moment. The bikers were getting closer, but Jack didn't move. He had faced men like these before, reckless, noisy, arrogant. They believed their numbers would intimidate him, that the sound of their engines and the glint of their weapons would force him to hesitate. But they were wrong. They had underestimated him, as so many others had done before. This wasn't the first time Jack found himself in a position where his enemies thought they had the upper hand. This wasn't the first time he was outnumbered, outgunned, or trapped in a corner. The truth was, Jack thrived in these situations. The more dangerous the situation, the sharper his focus became. He could almost feel the adrenaline coursing through his blood, his senses heightened as the sound of the wind and the engines grew louder. The streetlights flickered again, casting pools of light on his face, and there was a steely resolve in his eyes. There was no fear here, just the cold, unshakable truth that he would survive this. He knew there would be bloodshed ahead, and he understood that tonight could be the last night for someone. But it wouldn't be him. Not tonight. Jack wasn't just a survivor, he was a predator, and he had been waiting for this moment. Every wrong step, every fight that brought him to this point, had led to this moment where his enemies believed they were in control. They weren't. The roar of the engines grew louder, and the bikes appeared, their headlights cutting through the darkness like sharp beams of light. Jack's gaze locked on them, his body poised, waiting for the perfect moment. He took a deep breath, controlled his heartbeat, and tightened his grip on the knife. The first biker turned the corner, his face obscured by a black helmet. But Jack could see the arrogance in his movements, the swagger in his posture. That was the mistake of underestimating Jack, and this biker would learn the lesson the hard way. The wind picked up again, the trees rustling, as if the night itself was preparing for what was to come. And as Jack took a step forward, the sound of the bikes grew so loud that it reverberated, echoing, marking the beginning of the end for those who dared to face him. The alley was an eerie silence, an unsettling stillness that wrapped around Jack like a suffocating blanket. Yet, he knew better than to trust it. The roar of motorcycles had been growing louder with each passing second, a low growl in the distance that vibrated the air, signaling the arrival of danger. Tonight wasn't just another night in the city's underworld. Tonight, Jack wasn't hiding in the shadows, he was preparing for war. 3 bikers, dangerous and experienced, had come to settle a score, but Jack wasn't prey. He was the hunter, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. As the roar of the engines became deafening, the bikes screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. The riders dismounted with brutal confidence, their eyes scanning for their target. They didn't realize they were walking right into Jack's trap. The city was a labyrinth of shadows, but Jack had made this maze his home, and he was always a step ahead. Jack's senses were on high alert. He could feel the vibrations of the bikes in the air, could almost taste the metallic tang of gasoline that mixed with the bitter scent of rain. His instincts had been honed over years of survival in the streets, and tonight they were sharper than ever. His hands were steady as he gripped the gun, the weight of it familiar, reassuring. In the distance, The riders moved forward, unaware of the imminent danger. The first biker strode confidently toward the shadows, searching for Jack with arrogance. The second rider was more cautious, his eyes flicking over the darkness, trying to locate the hunter. But the third, he was the one Jack knew he had to be wary of. The third rider was the most dangerous, calm, calculating, and precise. Jack's eyes tracked every movement as the bikers fanned out. They were looking for a fight, but they didn't know what kind of fight they were about to get. The first biker was too bold, too sure of himself. His footsteps echoed against the damp pavement as he moved deeper into the alley. Jack's focus was on him, his mind calculating the best move. He could feel his pulse quicken, but he didn't flinch. He was ready. The second biker, slower, more deliberate, was still scanning the alley, his gaze sharp. He could sense something wasn't right, but hadn't yet figured out where Jack was hiding. It didn't matter. Jack had been in worse situations before, and he knew how to outthink his enemies. It was just a matter of waiting for the perfect moment. The third rider, however, was different. His eyes never stopped moving. He was always calculating, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Jack's gut told him that this was the one who would be the hardest to take down. Jack's strategy was simple: eliminate the biggest threat first, and the rest would fall like dominoes. And then it happened. The faintest sound, a boot scraping against gravel, was all Jack needed. The third rider had shifted his weight, making the smallest noise that broke the tension in the air. Jack didn't hesitate. He stepped out from the shadows, his gun already raised, his aim steady. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence, and the third rider crumpled to the ground, his body hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. The other 2 bikers reacted instantly, drawing their weapons and turning to face Jack. But they were too slow. By the time they realized what had happened, Jack was already in motion. He moved with fluid precision, each movement a well-rehearsed dance of violence. The second biker pulled his gun, but it was too late. Jack was already on him, his fist slamming into the rider's gut with a sickening thud, knocking the wind out of him. Before the rider could recover, Jack's elbow connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. The first rider, who had been more overconfident than the others, was already retreating. His eyes were wide with panic, but Jack didn't give him the chance to escape. The last biker drew a knife, a desperate attempt to regain control, but Jack was faster. In one smooth motion, Jack closed the distance between them, disarming the biker and sending him to the ground in a heap. The alley fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't the eerie silence of before. It was the silence of victory. Jack stood over the fallen bodies of the bikers, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of his breath. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he knew this was just the beginning. The bikers had come to settle a score, but Jack had made sure they wouldn't leave the alley alive. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes scanning the street beyond the alley. The city was still, its usual hum, muted in the wake of the violence that had just unfolded. But Jack wasn't fooled. He knew this wasn't over. These bikers were only a small part of a much larger problem. A problem that would come back to haunt him. The gang that ran these streets wasn't one to let a grudge go unpunished. The oppressive silence around Jack was suffocating, the air thick with tension as he waited for the inevitable confrontation. Every breath he took was measured, every sound around him scrutinized. He stood in the narrow alley, aware of every detail, each flicker of light, every subtle shift in the shadows. The cold concrete beneath his boots seemed to press against him, emphasizing the claustrophobia of the moment. His eyes scanned the rooftops above, but there was no movement, nothing. Still, Jack knew better than to relax. The city had a way of hiding danger in plain sight, making every corner appear safe until it was too late. His focus returned to the alley, his gaze narrowing as he searched for any signs of the gang. The stillness of the night was overwhelming. broken only by the faint hum of the distant city and the soft rustling of wind against the trash. The motorcycles had been silent for what seemed like an eternity. Jack's mind raced with the possibilities. Had they given up, or was it a trap? The silence was ominous, and Jack knew it was the calm before the storm. The engine noise, when it came, would be deafening. It started faint, distant, but quickly grew louder with each passing second. The growl of the engine vibrated in Jack's chest, stirring a primal response. Jack's mind was calculating. How many of them? Were they scouting, waiting for him to make a move? He had trained for moments like this: ambushes, surprise attacks, situations where staying calm was the key to survival. His breath hitched as the engine revved once more. They were too close now. Jack quickly checked the rooftops again, but there was nothing. His body was coiled, every muscle prepared for action. The engine noise grew louder, the sound reverberating in his bones. Jack tightened his grip on his weapon, steeling himself. The first move could be his last, but he wasn't going to let it be. The sound of the motorcycle echoed down the alley, louder now, filling the space with a sense of impending danger. Jack's pulse quickened, adrenaline flooding his system, but he remained focused. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of exhaust and burning rubber. He could smell them before he saw them. The bikers were close, circling and assessing the situation. Then, without warning, the engine cut out, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Jack froze, his body tense, knowing they were right outside. It wasn't a matter of if, but when they would make their move. He could hear the rustling of leather jackets, the creak of boots, and the faint murmur of voices in the dark. They were waiting for him to make a mistake. Jack's mind flashed back to his training in battle, the long nights spent moving silently through enemy territory. This wasn't just a fight, it was survival. And Jack had survived worse. He had faced enemies more ruthless and dangerous, and he had walked away from situations that should have ended his life. Tonight would be no different. The air was thick with tension, every muscle in Jack's body on edge. He could hear the bikers moving closer, adjusting their weapons. He knew they expected him to charge, to overpower them with brute force. But Jack didn't rely on force, he was about precision, stealth, and efficiency. A sudden, mocking laugh from one of the bikers broke the silence. It was a fatal mistake. The sound betrayed their position, and Jack knew it was time to act. With lightning speed, he moved, his weapon flashing in the dim light of the alley. The first shot rang out, shattering the stillness. The force of it sent shockwaves through the air, and in an instant, the tense standoff turned into full-scale confrontation. The bikers scrambled to draw their weapons, but Jack was faster. His instincts took over, and he moved with a fluidity and precision that left no room for error. The fight had begun, his finger hovering over the trigger. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, a war waging inside his mind. Was he doing the right thing, or was he becoming the very thing he despised? Guilt crept in, clouding his thoughts. He thought of the destruction caused by the bikers' bloodshed, shattered lives, families torn apart. Could he justify taking a life, even if it was for the greater good? His fingers tightened around the weapon, but the hesitation lingered. He had taken lives before, but it never got easier. Each decision haunted him. Yet, as the weight of the gun increased, the question of whether it was truly worth it became more pressing. He remembered the faces of those he had killed in the past: soldiers, criminals, and innocent victims caught in the crossfire. They all had loved ones, people who mourned them. But tonight, the guilt had to be pushed aside. The city had been suffocated by gangs like the bikers, and Jack had become the one person who could do something about it. He wasn't fighting for honor or glory, he was fighting for survival. The city had once been a place of hope, but now it was crawling with predators. The people who could have stopped the chaos were either too scared or too corrupt to act. Jack had tried the legal route, but the law had failed. It had been too slow, too broken. That left him to fight, even if it meant crossing a line he had set for himself. He wasn't a soldier anymore, nor was he a civilian. He was something in between. He had made a choice to protect the innocent, to stand against the lawlessness that had overtaken his city. This wasn't about revenge, it was about doing what was necessary. His mind raced through memories of the victims, the families destroyed by the gangs. The bikers didn't care about the lives they ruined. They saw people as pawns. Jack couldn't let them continue their reign of terror. If taking one life could save many, then he would make that choice, no matter the cost. Doubt had no place in his decision now. He had to act, or he would become as guilty as the monsters he sought to destroy. The first biker appeared, his silhouette cutting through the dark. Jack's mind was clear now, the hesitation gone. The city needed him. The people needed someone to take a stand, even if that meant getting his hands dirty. The biker was everything Jack had been fighting against: lawlessness, destruction, and violence. Jack wasn't going to let them win. He exhaled, steadying his breath. The shot rang out, and the hesitation was gone. The fight had begun.